Well, we're back. I've been putting off that nose job for like 2 years till we had that much time off so I could look this great for you. I'm Doug White, and it's the Security Weekly News, episode 324. Welcome to the week of 10 September 2023. We've got Mopria, I don't know how to say it, Cisco, Seimens, and Schneider, Word, AP Stylebook, DarkGate, GitHub, Chrome, more news, and Jason Wood on the Security Weekly News.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week, your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News.
Why does multi-factor authentication have to be a pain for users? It doesn't. Beyond Identity is the most secure MFA on the market and the easiest to use. They ensure that every authentication is multi-factor by default, with phishing-resistant factors that secure access from the start. Beyond Identity safeguards organizations from breaches, data loss, and fraud by eliminating weak phishable authentication factors like OTP and SMS push codes. Go to securityweekly.com/beyondidentity to get a free demo. That's securityweekly.com/beyondidentity to get a free demo today. Are you constantly thinking about how to keep your enterprise as secure as possible? Get to know Chrome Enterprise, the trusted browser for security-conscious professionals like you. Its ease of use for IT and security teams and added access controls protect the remote, extended, and hybrid workforce, keeping your entire enterprise safe. Don't settle for a browser that compromises your organization. Visit securityweekly.com/Chrome Enterprise now to learn more and start protecting your enterprise like never before. All right, welcome to Security Weekly News. I'm Doug White. Well, this week, Cisco warned of a 0 day in two acronyms that are absolutely terrifying when you hear the word 0 day with them. They're ASA and FTD. That's their adaptive security appliance and firepower threat defense. Those are firewalls if you aren't a Cisco person. And I've used an ASA for years and PICs before that. And hearing 0 day and ASA in the same sentence made me go, yeah. Well, the issue apparently is in the remote access VPN feature and can be exploited remotely without authentication in brute force attacks. So all that sounds pretty bad. The problem is an improper separation of authentication, authorization, and accounting, which is called AAA in Cisco, but that is between the remote access VPN and the HTTPS management and site-to-site VPN features. So I wasn't exactly sure how all those things interacted because I have not installed all of them. So I wasn't exactly sure. The article actually does explain all that if you're interested or you use those tools and you want a deeper dive. Exploitation, though, this was what sort of saved the day for me. Exploitation is kind of difficult, I think, because Cisco said that you would need to be able to specify a default connection profile tunnel group in order to identify a valid username and password pair that you could then brute force. And, okay, so that's starting to get, I don't know if I would call that, remote accessible without authentication, really. I mean, you'd have to know a lot to be able to do that. Not that you couldn't. But the advisory from Cisco said that an attacker with access to valid user credentials can exploit the flaw to establish a clientless SSL VPN session with an unauthorized user. And so I think what they mean is a user on the local system. But they went on and they said that the vulnerability is exploitable in brute force attacks if an infected device has a user configured with a password in the local database, which most everybody does, or it has HTTPS management authentication pointing to a valid AAA server, which a lot of people do, and the SSL VPN is enabled on at least one interface, or an ICE version 2 VPN is enabled on at least one interface. So there's an awful lot of factors that have to be in place, which is why it ends up with a 5.0 risk score. So when I saw, remote, 0 day, all that stuff, I was like, yikes, that was going to be a critical vulnerability. But then when they actually released it, not that it's not important that you patch it, but it wasn't as bad as I was thinking. And I was just really wondering why something that sounded so dire in the headline was only a 5 on, severity. But it does just sound like there's an awful lot of components to that has to be there. But I mean, most everybody does have local users on their ASA. I mean, you're supposed to really. But Cisco said they first identified the problem last month while investigating the Akira ransomware attacks that we've talked about before. Cisco is providing a list of indicators of compromise that you can refer to, and they have advised that you use their remediation advice until an upgrade patch is available. Well, speaking of patches, Seimens has published 7 new advisories, which covered 45 different vulnerabilities that affect the ICS products that they make. It would take too long to name all of them, but you can refer to the article if you use Seimens ICS. One of those was a critical vulnerability in the Weibo systems code meter software licensing and protection technology, which I had not heard of, but is actually embedded in a lot of Seimens products, including PSS, Cymatic, Cymit, Cynic, and Cinema, my favorite Seimens product name. They like that SI thing, right? You get it? SI? Yeah, Cinema. And it's Cinema with an S if you're not, I'm like, what? I thought Cinema was that place over on West 39th Street that's been showing Thar She Blows since 1968. And yes, that's a real movie, and that's the year it came out. I looked it up. But QMS Automotive is in the list with 10 medium and high vulnerabilities that include session hijacking, malicious file uploads, and so on. So pretty bad stuff. Rugged Com Ape 1808 products are affected by 24 plus medium and high severity vulnerabilities affecting the BIOS that's provided by Inside with a Y. Parasol and Team Center Visualization and JT2Go are also affected by remote code execution vulnerabilities, and so on. The list goes on. So, a very serious kind of thing. Schneider Electric also released a single new advisory to inform users about a high-severity vulnerability that is patched in the interactive graphical SCADA system product. That one is a missing authentication issue, which could allow a local attacker to actually change the update source, which could allow them to essentially download whatever they wanted when it updates, and so very, very bad. So ICS folks, time to get patching. Cinema. I'm gonna leave you to think of all the jokes we could make around the name Cinema. But there used to be a place in Hell's Kitchen called that, I swear, but it might have had a hyphen in it. And I think it was run by a guy named Anthony who had a scar on his right cheek and smoked those Jeten cigarettes. But I've never been there. I was just heard about it from somebody else. Yeah, no way. A Word document this was a weird story to me. I mean, it was kind of strange, but it was basically about this Word document that got captured in a phishing campaign. And I guess the reason it was notable was that it had so much malware in it. It was amazing. And it wasn't actually in the Word file when you read the article. Various malware that was listed included Redline Clipper, Agent Tesla, OriginBotNet. And I mean, if you're infecting somebody, you might as well, infect them a lot. But FortiGuard Labs, who did the report, said that any organization could be at risk from this campaign that they analyzed back in August. A technical breakdown of the campaign was published by FortiGuard yesterday, which has got grim detail about this if you're interested in such things. The Word document, per the write-up, though, only contains a malicious URL, which drops malware onto the victim. The Word doc is distributed via phishing, of course, and it's an email attachment. And when you open the attachment, it has one of those blurred images that in a fake reCAPTCHA. So it's basically saying you can't see this until you prove you're not a robot. And then, of course, you click on the blurred image reCAPTCHA, and, of course, well, as you might guess, that runs the initial loader. The second stage establishes persistence on the machine by duplicating an exe file into a directory that will run, and the file is called audacity.exe.exe, and so even if you restart the device, this automatically executes every single time. Redline Clippers run, and if you're not familiar with it, it's a malware that focuses on exfiltration of crypto wallets, and it's a .NET executable. But ultimately, the malware Redline Clippers substitutes a destination when you're trying to pay someone else. It subs in the attacker's wallet, so the payment you make goes to the attacker instead of wherever you're trying to pay. Agent Tesla, if you aren't familiar with that one, is a keystroke logger that can access the clipboard, looks for credentials and so forth. And of course, OriginBotNet, which on this particular one is stored as david.exe, collects data, communicates with a command and control server, downloads files, whatever needs to be done with that botnet. So it's a lot. And as this report shows, it can all start from this single Word document. So every detail of this attack is actually found in the link if you want to read about the design of the attack and how it works and what's in the file exactly and see the code and so forth. I mean, they have all the code there. It's really comprehensive. So any coder who has a method, in fact, I was looking at the code, anybody that's got a method called blood cholesterol level.org is okay by me. But I'm not sure what it did exactly. I didn't have time to go through all the code and figure it out. But I mean, basically, it's got a great name. So they do have all the site names and the links that this stuff attaches to in the article. I guess the real point is make sure your people know not to be clicking on Word files that they get, even via Teams. And in fact, we have another story about that in a minute. But I did think I would mention this next story since I do think this is going to get more common as we go along. So apparently an old AP Stylebook site was used to identify users in spear phishing attacks, which allowed them to direct those users to another site that had a fake AP Stylebook site and ask them to update their credit card information. Now, if you don't know what AP Stylebook is, you're probably among all of us who didn't know. I'd never heard of it. But basically, it's a really old site that is used by news organizations, and they use it for a source of grammar, punctuation, style questions, so forth, something subscribed to by newspapers and other journalist organizations. And I guess it's used at many, many, many newsrooms across the United States. And AP said that stylebooks.com notified them that the phishing emails were received by customers on July 20th, and they took the whole site down on the 23rd of July. The fake site that they were referring people to was also taken offline on the 27th of July. But AP said that names, email addresses, home addresses, user IDs, and so forth were stolen. And since most of the members had provided a tax-exempt ID or a social security number in lieu of a tax-exempt ID, those were probably also stolen too. The breach only did affect 224 accounts. But I think the point that it makes for us is that legacy systems may still be out there on your network somewhere. I mean, this happens all the time. And I remember in audits finding equipment that was listed as decommissioned, end of life, or something, and it was still sitting there running on the internet. I mean, we found that someone had taken an AS400 out of the company and set it up at home and was still running it with customer data on it on the internet, just because they liked running it. The company thought it was sitting in the basement and that it was not accessible from the internet. You know, I loved it when they told me that. But so when you evaluate your assets, or even if you're just in the process of end-of-lifing something, you may want to ensure that you know who can access it and how long it's going to sit there unpatched and so forth. I mean, I remember this email server I built, and I literally found that thing sitting 10 years later. It was sitting in an old storeroom, and it was connected, and I didn't have a monitor on it or anything, or even a keyboard, but it was still running. Nobody knew it was there, and they just never took it down. So, you know, you may want to scan for that kind of stuff. DarkGate is a malware as a service tool that has been being spread via a phishing campaign using compromised Teams accounts. So this has got a whole lot of components to it in terms of how you defend against this kind of stuff. DarkGate's an old piece of malware. It's been around since like 2017, but they said it had not been very active until the middle of this year when a souped-up version of the malware was being distributed in this email phishing and malvertising campaign. And malvert sounds like something my grandparents would have named one of their kids. In fact, they named one Malger. I was like, where did you get the name Malger? But Malvert, get over here and clean this mess up right now. But anyway, DarkGate is being offered as a ransomware as a service option for $100,000 a year, which implies that, you know, you could make a lot of money doing this. But TrueSec said in their blog post last week that the firm's incident response team had observed compromised Microsoft 365 accounts sending Teams chat messages with links to malicious files as a part of this campaign, which had DarkGate then as the payload. So they've compromised some Microsoft 365 accounts, and then they use those emails as a basis to make chat originations into Teams, which then, you know, basically asks the victim to open a zip file which contains, and I've actually seen something, it may have been this, that somebody showed me and said, what do you think about this? And I was like, I wouldn't click on it for anything. But basically it was a link shortcut file disguised as a PDF document. And so when you click that, of course, it links you to the command and control server. The chat messages were detected because the targets had security awareness training, according to TrueSec. Interesting. Safe attachments, neither safe attachments nor safe links detected this or blocked the attack, probably because it was all within Microsoft, you know, the Microsoft bubble. But the advice was that you should only allow Teams chat requests from specific external domains, and that you would need to whitelist all trusted external domains, which is, of course, an onerous task. But, if you've got people getting chats in, chat requests in Teams from what look like valid accounts, a lot of people are going to click that link. So hopefully your training has encouraged them to validate anything that's got a file, especially zip files attached to it, but Microsoft Word files as well. Well, a GitHub vulnerability has exposed more than 4,000 repositories to repo jacking attacks. Essentially, the issue could allow, if you're not familiar with this kind of attack, it basically is going to allow the attacker to exploit, this particular one, it exploits a racetrack condition within GitHub's repository creation and username renaming operation according to check marks. Now, Microsoft, who owns GitHub, said the issue was addressed as of September 1st, but that they responsibly disclosed it on the 1st of March. So that means it's been out there a while. And so repo jacking then is basically anything where an attacker bypasses or exploits the security on a repository and manages to take that repository over, which means, of course, they could then update the code in the repository to be whatever they wanted to. Especially these are, dangerous for well-known and widely used repositories. And if somebody exploits that and replaces the current version with a new commit that's got malware in it or whatever, it could be really, really bad. And as we say in the industry, the term bad is relative. But it's very, very dangerous. There is a very detailed explanation in the article about how this all works. And it's pretty scary to me because when they said more than 4,000 repositories were vulnerable to this attack. So that's pretty frightening, if you ask me. Well, Chrome pushed out some privacy updates, I'm going to put that in air quotes too, which asks users to accept a new round of options, and I saw this, which basically says they're going to allow 3 different types of tracking data about your browsing habits to be collected and shared, with a lot of reassurances that this will assist us, but it will not be able to be identified with you. I was not real excited about what they had to say there. Basically, this is allowing you to opt out of something they've been doing all along, of course. But it means you need to opt out because the default setup was, of course, that it's all turned on. And there was a lot of sort of, justification for this and why you'd want to do it and why you'd want to allow them to target you with ads and so forth. And, of course, the way it's set up, most people are going to just hit OK and accept the new settings, which are the same as the old settings, of course, unless you've now turn them all off. I presume this has something to do with some of their laws in Europe. Now, the minute you tell me I can opt out, I opt out. It says, hey, you get a free steak dinner at Ruth Chris, I opt out. I'm like, just enter your email. And if I do have to opt in, I put fake emails and everything else. So just so you guys know out there. But if you already clicked OK, you're not screwed. You can go to the settings. It's settings, privacy and security, add privacy. And you could use the link in that article that they provided to toggle these options off. Basically, the recommendation in the article is that you should turn them all off despite their apparently harmless nature, because you're basically saying you can track me, regardless of how many times you're going to tell me that it's okay. The 3 options basically say that they're going to allow tracking of what you buy, when you buy it, and how effective ads have been. So basically, they're checking your click-through on any given ad, and of course whether or not you then proceed to purchase something. So they say that it's blind, that the information is delayed, but it does go on and say they're going to share this with other people. And of course, you don't know what those people's policies are. So once they share it to MrFufu.com, and Mr. Fufu is based in Yemen, and Mr. Fufu sells that information to, I don't know, Al-Qaeda, they have no control over it, and they can say, hey, we did our job, and we didn't know. You said okay. So I would go in and turn those off. And the general advice of the article is to turn them off. This is an article you can share with average readers, so if you want to use it to distribute, you can. Well, before becoming one of the most popular body doubles in history, he went by the name Malvert Krapishnik and went on to do nude scenes for Brad Pitt's bum, Christian Bale's naughty bits, and a brief turn playing Robert Redford's left ankle. Please welcome Jason Wood.
Hey everybody, good to be back with you. This article actually comes from Google's threat analysis group, which released this bulletin late last week. That sounds very ominous. Picture the theme song from Jaws playing in the background, maybe a horror suspense kind of voice, just when you thought it was safe to go back to researching security. The post warned security researchers that at least some researchers out there have been targeted by a group that's backed by the North Korean government. And the campaign is something that Google picked up. Actually, they said they picked up on it in a few weeks, which I thought was pretty quick. And they don't have a lot of information in here, but they're giving some basic ideas of the way the attack plays out. And so I thought it was worth covering here. Like I said, the information is thin at this point. They don't describe the details of like what is being targeted in some ways, but which I'll get to in a moment. But basically, security researchers get contacted on social media, and they don't. The attacker doesn't immediately start asking for things. They just start trying to build some rapport, and they're spending time involved in this. And you get some back and forth where somebody gets contacted. Hey, I see you're doing vulnerability research on X technology over here. Me too. And let's talk about this. And then you build up that rapport, and then they start talking about collaborating and which is something I know, we enjoy doing. And then eventually the conversation moves off of social media to something like Signal or WhatsApp, where it's all encrypted end to end, and also kind of fits into, at least Signal side of things for what folks in security like. And that relationship continues to be cultivated. Finally, the attacker sends over a malicious file with a 0-day for an unknown, but according to Google, popular application. The payload basically checks to see, do we have virtualization that we're running inside of, and then start sending information back to the attacker's command and control. And now they have some kind of access to the researcher's system. Now, Google has not gone out and identified the software application that is being targeted for the attack. As they say, it's fairly popular, and the patch is still being developed, and so they want to give the vendor some more time to fix it. So I was a little bummed there because I wanted to know just what it was they're targeting. Hopefully, they'll come back later and tell us, a little bit more information. But this is an active campaign being run by a state-sponsored group coming out of North Korea, coming after security researchers directly. They also have another play out there. This one's a little bit more wait and see type of thing, I would guess, unless they're directing traffic here. But the attackers are credited with building a tool that basically assists people doing reverse engineering that will, in one tool, download debugging symbols from Microsoft, Google, Mozilla, and Citrix all in one handy interface. And so tries to pose as a useful utility, and actually apparently does what it's supposed to do. Unfortunately, it also contains malicious code that contacts the actor's backdoor. Now, that's about all of the bulletin states, but there were a few things that I picked out also that caught my attention. The first was that the account that they're talking about on Twitter, formerly, or X, I guess, formerly known as Twitter, basically was created back in January of 2020. So the attack is now going on 3.5 years later. So I am imagining at this point, and they linked to a Mastodon account that was also used by the attacker, same username. But anyhow, this account was obviously set up well in advance of this. Probably is just a pool of accounts to use later, and maybe put some stuff on to look more credible and whatnot. And so they decided to break this thing out and start interacting with researchers and pretending that they're a researcher as well. The domain that was used was more recently, much more recently registered for the domain they used for command and control. That was registered in March of this year, so that's more of an on-demand kind of thing, it sounds like. Either way, I thought it was interesting that they've got some resources here that were set up, years in advance. The second thing that stood out to me was the fact that they burned a 0-day to target researchers. So, a little bit of priority, it seems, here in this campaign. Perhaps they purchased the 0-day from somebody else, so it wasn't that big of a deal. Maybe they developed it in-house, but either way, they decided to put something of value in play. for the attack, maybe because they wanted to not take the risk of having a known vulnerability and exploit being used and being spotted. But like that seemed kind of significant. Like I said, I'm still kind of curious. What is the app that was exploited? Is this something particular to security researchers, or was it more general? I'm not sure what's going on there. And finally, the last bit was just the idea that we've got state-sponsored folks, groups going after individual security researchers, which sounds, I remember when we started talking about years ago when they started talking about APTs and all this stuff, and if you remember reading some quote on Twitter, if your threat model includes nation states, you're doing it wrong. But never, here it is. Our threat model includes nation states. Things have changed quite a bit, as certainly the information that we know. But it's not really that odd that the researchers would be targeted, because was an earlier post, actually the North Koreans were running a similar campaign, and they don't get into how they do the identification of this or offer much supporting information there. But there was an earlier campaign back in January 2021 that Google called out other attacks that were occurring against researchers. So this is kind of the most recent iteration of that. But they are targeting researchers who are doing vulnerability research and development and are working at companies that are of interest to groups like this. So it sounds very individual, and it is very targeted type of attack, but instead of going after an executive and the people that work around them, they're going after the technical people because they apparently have the information or the access that the threat actors are interested in. And the social engineering play is kind of interesting to me. They're investing time in this, and they're definitely hitting things that that we may be more susceptible to. I have worked with a number of people now for a long time that you meet online, you hang out and talk with and do stuff with them, and I've never met them in real life, like Doug and I've never met in real life, for example. So, we get used to that type of feel. And so this probably doesn't stand out as particularly unusual. Interact with folks from different countries. So we're used to the idea that, maybe their English or whatnot isn't quite to native speaking level. And so, it's an interesting play. We generally like talking shop and sharing ideas and feeding off of each other. And they're just playing on that. I guess the warning here at Google just makes some basic warnings about, hey, we've done stuff to prevent them from, the safe browsing, and the things have been blocked there in browsers and whatnot. And basically just kind of leaves a generic warning for us to be very more vigilant and up our game. I'd like to say that, we wouldn't fall prey to something like this, but, obviously security folks are just as human as anybody else, and so we can be targeted with a well-crafted play and become a victim as long as somebody's hitting the right buttons. So it's an interesting read to look at. I'm very interested when Google releases more information, because we don't have much at this point. But be aware out there, spread the word maybe to folks if they haven't heard about it. As to who will be targeted next, really, there's only one person who can ever know. And to see what he can divine of the situation, let's go back to the great mystic and the all-knowing, all-seeing, the heir of Karnak the Magnificent, the one and only Dr. Doug, the more than adequate.
I tell you, if I was really prepared, I would have had a turban ready for that. The answer is Jack Nicholson. Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah. And it is weird that we've never met in person. I think that's so very strange. But I mean,
it didn't occur to me till I was saying that. I'm like, oddly enough, Doug and I've been doing this for years, and we've never been in the same room together.
Yeah, I mean, I've dated people I was around less than I've been around you. So it's yeah. Thanks, Jason. That is the weird modern thing. And finally, Mopria. I don't know how to say it. It does sound like another name my grandparents would have used, because they were really big on alphabetization, because my grandmother's parents, all of her sisters, all their names were alphabetic. So, Now you got Malvert and Mopria. I mean, okay, but I'd never heard of it, really. I mean, I'm not sure why I hadn't heard of it, but when I read about it, I was like, yeah, it seems like I've heard something about this. But the Mopria Alliance is tasked with providing universal standards in printing and scanning and has members like Epson, Lexmark, Adobe, and Microsoft. And Microsoft has built Mopria support into everything since Windows 10 21H2 and have now said that the addition of the IPP class drive will remove the need for print device manufacturers to provide their own installers, drivers, utilities, and so forth. So basically what they're saying is that pretty soon it's going to be an abstraction layer for your printer that Microsoft controls, I presume. And so what that's going to do, and the reason I even bothered mentioning it, was it's going to force retire some legacy tech out there. And of course, that's going to give Mopria control of your printer and your scanner and so forth if you still have those things. The next milestone, though, is in 2025. And Microsoft said that as of 2025, no new printer drivers will be published in Windows Update, but existing drivers will still be updatable. In 2026, IPP Inbox class driver will be at the top of every driver list and be the preferred driver. This is like sound drivers are now. And then in 2027, they will have no further printer updates allowed except security-related fixes. So they're phasing out the ability of manufacturers, I guess, to push their own personalized interfaces. I mean, I guess you could install your own drivers or write your own drivers like we used to do with Gen 2 and stuff like that. But I think it's probably time to think about putting that old HP LaserJet 2 out in the barn, you know, just in case you might need it for something. I remember cleaning out Lou's house and how many of those he had. But, I mean, this is also why I still have a 1948 Underwood cast iron manual typewriter that you can use to hold down a hot air balloon or anchor your sailboat or whatever. Works just fine. But that's the news. Thanks to Jason Wood, and I will see you Friday.